He tried to make me small. He stood in front of his CEO, in front of my wife, and tried to paint me as a failure. Just a freeloader living in her shadow. The entire room was silent, just waiting for me to break. But when the truth finally came out, his world was the one that shattered. This is a story about how the quietest person in the room can have the loudest impact. You're not going to want to miss what happens next. So, before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Inspiration Seeker. Hit that like button if you love a good story of justice, and comment below. Have you ever been completely underestimated? Alright. Let's start at the beginning. The elevator doors opened with a silent, expensive hiss. The air that hit me wasn't the normal Chicago chill I was used to. This air was warm, filtered, and thick with the combined smell of expensive perfume and quiet, ruthless ambition. This was my wife Elizabeth's world. It was absolutely not mine. She looked magnetic. Her dress was the color of a deep emerald, and it caught the light from the city skyline blazing through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse ballroom. She was a rising star VP at one of the biggest investment firms in the country. She belonged here. I, on the other hand, felt like I was wearing a costume. My navy tie was neatly knotted. My suit was clean, pressed, and dark. But it was simple. It didn't scream power like the designer armor everyone else was wearing. Elizabeth squeezed my hand, her palm just a little clammy. "Stephen, thanks for doing this," she whispered, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I know these Gala things are a lot." She was right. I'm a novelist. My battlefield is a blank page and a lukewarm cup of coffee in the quiet of our den. This was a shark tank. To these people, I wasn't Stephen. I was just the husband, the plus one, the domestic distraction, the guy who definitely doesn't understand venture capital. We stepped into the main ballroom, a cavern of noise, clinking glasses, and booming, confident laughter. It felt like walking onto a stage. I saw the eyes scan me, a quick, practiced appraisal. From my shoes to my haircut. The verdict was always the same: not one of us. Irrelevant. I was used to it. I just smiled back at Elizabeth. "You're the star here. I'm just happy to be your escort." I was trying to put her at ease, but my own stomach was in a knot. I recognized the faces from the stories she told me. The managing partners, the rivals. And then, across the room, I saw him. Roger. He hadn't seen us yet, but his night was all about performance. And unfortunately for me, I was about to become part of his show. We hadn't taken 5 steps toward the bar before he materialized, emerging from a laughing cluster of subordinates like a predator singling out its prey. Roger. He was the living, breathing stereotype of a Wall Street wolf, right down to the offensively perfect slicked-back hair and the $1,000 smile that never, ever touched his eyes. Roger was Elizabeth's direct rival. They were both VPs, both brilliant, but where Elizabeth led with intelligence and integrity, Roger clawed his way up with pure, unadulterated aggression. And he hated me. He hated me because I didn't play his game. He couldn't categorize me, couldn't figure me out, so he decided I was simply beneath him. A gnat. "Elizabeth. Darling," he boomed, loud enough for everyone in a 10-foot radius to turn. He glided past her, kissing the air near both her cheeks in a way that was more territorial than affectionate. His eyes, sharp and cold, immediately landed on me. And Stephen. He drew my name out, as if tasting something unpleasant. "Good of you to show up." His gaze did that familiar scan I'd come to loathe. Down my simple suit, lingering on my non-designer watch, and back up to my face with a barely concealed smirk. He was measuring me and finding me worthless. "Did you manage to get a babysitter?" he asked, his voice dripping with faux concern. He turned to the small group now watching us. "Stephen here is, what is it you do again, pal? A blogger. Writing the great American, pamphlet." His audience chuckled. I saw Elizabeth's hand clench into a fist at her side. I just offered him a calm, polite smile. "Something like that, Roger. Just trying to keep busy. Right, he scoffed, already bored with me and turning his full, predatory attention back to my wife. Liz, sweetheart, I need to steal you. Walter was just asking about the new telecom portfolio. He wasn't asking about. He waved a dismissive hand in my general direction. Well, anything else? He had done it. In one move, he dismissed me, complimented my wife while undermining her, and re-established himself as the center of the universe. Elizabeth bristled, her voice tight. I'm with my husband, Roger. Oh, I know, he said, that shark's smile widening. Don't worry. We'll return him to the kids' table when we're done. Before I could respond, he had his hand on the small of Elizabeth's back, guiding her away. She gave me a desperate, apologetic look over her shoulder. I just gave her a small nod. It's fine. Go. Don't let him win. But I knew, right then, that this was only the beginning. Roger wasn't just making a power play against Elizabeth. He had smelled blood in the water, and tonight, he had decided he was going to make an example out of me. For the next hour, I perfected the art of strategic invisibility. Elizabeth was immediately absorbed into the executive whirlwind, whisked away by Roger to meet with Walter, the CEO. I was left adrift, a civilian in a war zone. I did what I always do. I found a quiet corner by one of the massive windows, grabbed a club soda with lime, and I watched. As a novelist, I'm a professional observer. And this was a fascinating, if cold, ecosystem. It wasn't a party, it was a performance. I watched men and women in razor-sharp suits circle each other, their conversations not connections, but transactions. They were trading favors, assessing threats, and gauging power with every handshake. I felt like an anthropologist studying a strange, undiscovered tribe. I was so lost in my observation of the city lights, a glittering, cold tapestry 80 floors below, that I almost missed his voice. Almost. Roger's voice has a special quality. It's loud, but it's the frequency of it, a vibration of pure, unearned confidence that just cuts through everything. He was holding court not 10 feet away, his back to me, talking to a small group that included Janice, another VP from Elizabeth's team, and 2 older board members. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. You don't have to try with Roger. He broadcasts. She's a titan, no doubt, Roger was saying, clearly talking about Elizabeth. I heard Janice murmur in agreement. But seriously, Roger laughed, a sharp, barking sound. I just don't get how a powerhouse like her stays with that guy. My blood went cold. I mean, think about it, he continued, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone that was still loud enough to carry. She's a Formula One car, and he's ballast. A weight in the trunk. She'd be in the C-suite this year if she had a real power partner, not a wallflower. My hand tightened on the cold, damp glass. Just slightly. Ballast. A heavy, useless weight, slowing her down. The group offered a few nervous, polite chuckles. They didn't agree or disagree. They just let it happen. That was the rule in the Shark Tank. Don't defend the weak. He had no idea I was right behind him. Or maybe he did. With Roger, you could never be sure. The cruelty was the point. I stayed perfectly still, staring out at the Chicago skyline, my reflection showing a calm, composed man. But inside, I felt a familiar, cold fury begin to build. This wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war. The evening wore on. Dinner was served, tiny, exquisite portions of food that cost more than my first car. I eventually rejoined Elizabeth, who had managed to escape Roger's orbit, but her shoulders were tight. He's in rare form tonight, she muttered, trying to smile it off. Just ignore him, Stephen. He's irrelevant. But he wasn't, was he? In this room, I was the one who was irrelevant. He was a king. After dessert, the formal part of the evening began. The CEO, Walter, a man who looked like he'd been carved from old-world granite, took the stage. He was gracious, spoke of market projections and the firm's legacy, and thanked everyone for their hard work. It was standard, corporate, and safe. He raised his glass, we all dutifully clapped, and for a moment, I thought the danger had passed. Then, just as the polite applause was fading and the band was about to start up again, Roger stepped onto the low stage. He tapped the microphone, the thump-thump sound cutting through the chatter. "If I could have your attention for just one more minute," he said. His voice was too loud, too slick. He'd definitely had a few more cocktails since I'd last seen him. The ambition was rolling off him in waves. "Walter, that was a beautiful speech." "Beautiful," he said, oozing insincerity. "But I want to raise a toast to something a little more real." The room quieted, sensing the shift in energy. This wasn't on the program. "I want to toast the people who really make this firm great. The closers. The winners. The people who know that in this business, you don't get points for trying. You get points for winning." He paced the front of the stage, his eyes scanning the crowd like a searchlight. "And then, they found us." He locked onto Elizabeth, then slid his gaze to me. A slow, cruel, ambitious smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who saw a perfect opportunity. He was going to use me. He was going to stand on my back to make himself look taller. He was going to make an example of me, the ballast, to prove to the CEO, to the board, and to my own wife, that he was the kind of power partner a winner deserved. The setup was complete. The trap was sprung. And I had walked right into it. "It's about making sacrifices," Roger continued, his voice now practically crooning with self-satisfaction. He was pacing that small stage, a true performer who had found his climax. "It's about being all in, 24/7. Am I right?" He gestured, not quite pointing, but almost directly toward our table. "Elizabeth," he said, and the entire room, every set of eyes, was now locked on her. "We all admire your dedication. Your numbers, they're incredible." He let the compliment hang in the air, making it feel heavy. "Especially," he said, drawing the word out, "considering not all of us, shall we say, are burdened with domestic distractions." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. I felt Elizabeth, beside me, go rigid as steel. Her colleagues, like Janice, were suddenly studying their napkins as if they held the secrets to the universe. They couldn't look at us. But Roger wasn't done. "Oh, no." He turned, fully, and smiled, that big, false smile, directly at me. The spotlight seemed to follow his gaze, landing right on my face. "Isn't that right, Stephen?" He said my name like it was a dirty joke. The room, which moments ago had been buzzing, was now utterly, completely silent. Not a polite silent. This was a tense, cruel silence, the collective inhale before something terrible happens. "Tell us," he said, leaning into the microphone, as if sharing an intimate secret with 300 people. "What's it like, honestly, living in the shadow of a real success story?" My heart wasn't pounding. It just felt stopped. This was it. The public execution. "I mean, it must be nice, right?" He pressed on, his voice now dripping with a fake sympathy that was infinitely more insulting than anger. "To, sit back, relax. Let your wife pay for everything." There it was. He'd said it. Ballast. Freeloader. The man who lived off his wife. I felt Elizabeth's hand grip my forearm. Her nails were digging into my suit jacket, and I wasn't sure if she was trying to hold me back or just holding herself up. Her face was pale, her eyes blazing with a fury I rarely saw. And Roger? He just stood there, under the lights, smirking, waiting. He had sprung the trap, and I was the animal caught in it. He was waiting for me to stammer, to blush, to offer a weak defense, or, his fondest wish, to run. The silence was a physical weight, crushing all of us. And he was enjoying every single second. The music didn't just fade. It died. In the half-second after Roger finished speaking, the silence that crashed down on the room was absolute. It was a physical thing, a heavy, cold blanket that smothered every other sound. The clink of a single fork hitting a plate from a table in the back sounded like a gunshot. Every single. They weren't on Roger anymore, the triumphant performer on his stage. They weren't even on Elizabeth, the powerhouse VP. They were all on me. The ballast. The distraction. The freeloader. I could see them all. Janice, who usually had a kind word for me, was staring, mortified, into her half-eaten dessert, unable to look up. Others were less kind. I saw pity in some eyes, which was worse. I saw veiled amusement in others. But most of all, I saw that hungry, car crash curiosity. They were all waiting for me to break. Beside me, Elizabeth was no longer pale. Her face was now a deep, furious red. She was shaking. Her hand on my arm was a vice grip, her nails digging through the fabric of my suit, a desperate, white-knuckled anchor. She wasn't holding me back. I think she was the only thing holding herself back from leaping onto that stage. And Roger. He just stood there. He leaned one hand casually on the lectern, basking in the spotlight, that shark smile plastered on his face. He was savoring it. This was his masterpiece. He was waiting for the stammer, the blush, the pathetic, mumbled defense. He was waiting for me to crumble, right there, in front of the CEO, the board, and my own wife. 5 seconds passed. In a normal conversation, it's a pause. In a public humiliation, it's an eternity. 10 seconds. The silence was now a living entity, growing heavier, crackling with tension. 15 seconds. The stillness in the room was agonizing. People were holding their breath. Even Roger's smile began to waver, just slightly, a flicker of confusion. He had expected a quick kill, not this quiet resistance. He finally pushed himself off the lectern, ready to speak again, ready to twist the knife one last time to finish the job. He opened his mouth. But he never got the chance. It was the voice that broke the spell. Roger, that is more than enough. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The voice was deep, gravelly, and cut through the silence with the natural authority of a man who owned the entire building. Every head in the ballroom, every analyst, every rival, every partner, snapped in unison. They were no longer looking at me. They turned toward the head table. Walter, the CEO, had pushed his chair back. He wasn't fully standing, but he was no longer sitting. He was poised, and the genial, grandfatherly host aura had evaporated. The man who ran one of the largest firms in the country was in its place. But it wasn't Walter who made my stomach twist. It was his wife, Gloria. She was a force in her own right, old money Chicago, a formidable patron of the arts, a woman whose polite dismissal could end a career. And she wasn't looking at Roger. She wasn't looking at her husband. She was staring, directly, intensely, at me. Her eyes were wide. Her perfectly painted mouth was slightly agape. Her hand, glittering with diamonds, was frozen in the air, halfway to her wine glass. She wasn't looking at me with pity or anger. She was looking at me with pure, unadulterated recognition. As if she'd just seen a ghost. On stage, Roger's mask of arrogance didn't just crack. It shattered. "Mr. Harrison," he stammered, his confident baritone suddenly a high-pitched, panicked squeak. "Sir. It was just some light ribbing, a toast." Walter didn't even glance at him. He ignored him, dismissed him, as if he were a buzzing insect. His eyes were locked on me. And then, he did something that made the entire room collectively hold its breath. He stepped away from the head table. He started walking. He moved past his senior partners, who parted for him like the Red Sea. He crossed the empty dance floor, directly, toward our table. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. Elizabeth was still gripping my arm, her knuckles white. Walter looked me up and down, a sharp, appraising stare. And then, a flicker of something, amusement? Disbelief? It crossed his features. He slowly extended his hand. "My goodness," he said, his voice now filled with a strange, crackling new energy. I had absolutely no idea. He looked me up and down one more time, then back to my face. You are him, aren't you? I let out a slow breath I felt like I'd been holding for 5 minutes. Elizabeth's grip on my arm was still painful, but I gently covered her hand with my own. I try to keep a low profile, Walter, I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room. I finally shook his extended hand. Stephen is just easier. Walter let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. A sound of pure astonishment. He turned from me to face the entire, frozen, baffled room. His wife, Gloria, was now on her feet, walking quickly toward us, her face a mask of electrified awe. Roger, Walter called out, his voice booming with authority. Roger, who was still on stage, looked like a man about to face a firing squad. Roger, Walter repeated, you just asked Stephen what it's like to live in the shadow of a success story. He put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that sent a new shockwave through the crowd. Gloria and I, he announced to the room, just finished his latest book. We couldn't put it down. He paused, letting the words sink in, though no one understood them yet. For those of you who have been living under a rock, Walter continued, his voice laced with a new, sharp, and very cold anger directed at Roger. Our firm's philanthropic foundation, the one I personally chair, has been trying to get a meeting with a certain author for 6 months. An author who values his privacy more than anything in the world. Gloria finally reached us. She bypassed her husband, bypassed Elizabeth, and grabbed both of my hands. I knew I recognized you, she whispered, loud enough for the first few tables to hear. Your photo in Forbes, I told Walter. He looks different in person. Walter's voice rose, filling the penthouse. He pointed directly at me. This is S.R. Daniels, the author of the Quantum Zeno series. He didn't just say it. He proclaimed it. And the world tilted. If the silence from before was a physical weight, the sound that replaced it was an explosion. No, not an explosion. An implosion. It was the sound of 300 of the city's most powerful and ambitious people, all realizing, processing, and whispering at the exact same time. It was a rushing, sibilant whoosh that filled the entire penthouse. S.R. Daniels? I heard from one table. The Quantum Zeno guy. From another. That's him. Walter's Foundation. My God, he's... I saw a managing partner near the front, a man who hadn't even glanced at me all night, subtly pull out his phone under the table. His eyes widened as he stared at the screen, then back at me, his face a mask of disbelief. But my focus was on 2 people. I looked at Elizabeth. Her hand was still on my arm, but the painful, white-knuckled grip had gone slack. Her fingers were just resting there. Her face was no longer pale with rage. It was pale with a new, profound, and absolute shock. She was staring at me, not as her husband, but as this stranger everyone was suddenly talking about. Stephen? She whispered, her voice barely a breath. And then, I looked at the stage. Roger. He was still standing there. Frozen. The spotlight was still on him, but it felt different. It was no longer a spotlight, it was an interrogation lamp. The microphone hung uselessly from his limp hand, which had started to tremble. The color wasn't just gone from his face. It was as if his face had been bleached. It was the color of chalk. The color of ash. He looked like a man who had just confidently placed a bet, only to turn over his cards and find he'd gambled away his house, his car, and his entire future. He hadn't just insulted a +1. He hadn't just insulted a colleague's husband. He had publicly, loudly, and arrogantly humiliated a man who was, by every financial metric in that room, worth more than anyone there, including, probably, Walter himself. He had insulted the man his own CEO was desperate to partner with. He was, in that single frozen moment, completely and utterly finished. And he knew it. The universe of that ballroom didn't just shift. It shattered and instantly reformed around a new, heavy, and very quiet center of gravity. Me. Gloria was still holding my hands, her diamonds digging into my skin. You must forgive us, sir. May I call you Stephen? You must come to our table. Walter, we have to talk to him about the new children's library wing. Walter, his face a mixture of amusement and profound relief, clapped a hand on my shoulder. We'll talk, Stephen. We will definitely talk. And just like that, the dam broke. It was no longer a whoosh of whispers. It was the sound of movement. It was the sound of dozens of high-powered executives, partners, and board members all realizing that the most valuable asset in the room was the man they had collectively ignored for 3 hours. Men who had looked through me, who had seen me as nothing more than set dressing, were now angling, smiling, and surging forward, their business cards appearing in their hands as if by magic. Mr. Daniels, a word. A huge fan of your work. I run our media investments division. I was an island, and the tide was rushing in. And through that surging crowd of new admirers, I saw one man moving against the current. Roger. He was a ghost. His face was waxy, his eyes wide and vacant. He stumbled as he pushed past a partner who didn't even notice him, his entire focus on getting to me. He finally broke through the small circle that Gloria and Walter had formed around me. Sir, he stammered, his voice cracking. Mr. Daniels. Stephen. I. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. He was begging for, what? Forgiveness. For me to say it was all a joke? I had no idea, he finally whispered, his entire career hanging in that one pathetic admission. I looked at him. The man who had called me ballast. The shark who had tried to publicly gut me to advance his own career. And I gave him that same, simple, polite smile from the beginning of the night. I know, I said. That was all. He didn't visibly crumble, but something inside him did. He just deflated. He turned, without another word, and walked away. Not to the bar. Not to a table. He just walked toward the exit, a man who was already gone, leaving a wake of total silence in his small, insignificant path. I turned back to Elizabeth. She had been silent this entire time, just watching me. Her eyes were so wide, filled with a million questions. I smiled at her, a real smile this time. I think I've had enough party for one night. I politely excused myself from a now protesting Gloria and Walter, promising to have my agent call their foundation. I took Elizabeth's hand. It was no longer gripping mine in anger. It was laced through mine. We walked out of that ballroom, and this time, the path parted for us. When the elevator doors hissed shut, sealing us in, Elizabeth slumped against the wall, a breathless, hysterical laugh bubbling up. S.R. Daniels, she finally said. Stephen is easier, I repeated, pulling her close. She leaned her head on my shoulder, just as she had in the elevator on the way up. My quiet, simple husband, she whispered, her voice full of wonder, exhaustion, and a love so deep it was the only real thing I'd felt all night. The power in that room hadn't just been rewritten. It had been revealed. And the wallflower had just proven he was the one with the deepest roots. The elevator doors hissed shut, and the world went silent. The sound of the party, the chaos, the whispers, it was all gone. It was just the two of us, descending 80 floors in a quiet, mirrored box. Elizabeth was silent for the first 10 floors. Then she started to laugh. It wasn't a smile or a chuckle. It was a deep, breathless, tears streaming down her face laugh of pure, unadulterated shock. She finally had to lean against the elevator wall to support herself. S.R. Daniels. She finally got out, gasping for air. The Quantum Xeno series? Stephen, my nerdy book club read that. We spent a month arguing about the ending. We all thought the author was some 80-year-old recluse in Vermont. I just smiled, pulling her close. I am a recluse, I said quietly. Just not in Vermont. She punched my arm, hard. You're not a recluse. You're just sneaky. Her laughter faded into a softer smile. Why? Why didn't you ever tell me? I looked at our reflection. Her, in her emerald dress, me in my simple suit. Because I just wanted to be Steven. Your husband. The guy who's bad at loading the dishwasher. I didn't want him to be in our marriage. I didn't want that kind of noise in our home. She understood. And what of the fallout? Well, Walter got his meeting. We are, in fact, funding 2 children's library wings now. He's called it the Harrison Daniels Initiative. A very political, very savvy move. Elizabeth's life at the firm changed. They look at her differently now. Not just as a rising star, but as the quiet, unassuming partner to the biggest power player they'd ever met. Her rivals, they don't challenge her. They're terrified of who her +1 might be. And Roger? He wasn't fired. Walter didn't have to lift a finger. I heard through the grapevine that Roger's resignation email was sent at 7 a.m. the next morning. He didn't even come in to clean out his desk. He just vanished. He became the ghost he always tried to make me. The ballast, as it turned out, had sunk his ship. I'm back in my den now. The coffee is lukewarm. The cursor on my screen is blinking. It's quiet. It's funny. Roger spent his entire life making so much noise. He thought power was about being the loudest, about standing in the spotlight, about making other people feel small. He never understood. He never realized that true power, real gravity, doesn't make a sound. It's the quietest, heaviest thing in the universe. It's the silence that remains, long after all the noise has faded away.